"You don't fit the image we're going for this Christmas, Helen." My daughter-in-law said those words so casually that for a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard her. I stood in my kitchen holding a box of ornaments I'd planned to bring to their house that weekend. The same glass ornaments my late husband and I had collected over nearly 30 years of marriage. Some came from little antique stores during road trips through Vermont. Others were gifts from church friends long gone now. They weren't expensive, but every single one carried a memory. Nicole's voice came through the phone smooth and cold. "We're doing something more upscale this year. Ethan invited a few business clients, and honestly, she paused just long enough to make it hurt. The whole coupon clipping grandma thing doesn't really match the atmosphere." I felt my fingers tighten around the ornament box. One of the silver bells inside gave a soft clink. In the background, I could hear my grandchildren laughing somewhere inside their house. Then Ethan's voice drifted faintly through the speaker. "Did you tell her yet?" Nicole lowered her voice, but not enough. "I'm handling it." My son didn't say another word. That silence hurt far more than Nicole's cruelty ever could. After the call ended, I stood alone in my kitchen staring at the blinking lights of my little Christmas tree. It was barely 6 feet tall and leaned slightly to the left because the old stand was bent, but I still used it every year. Walter used to joke that the crooked tree gave the house character. Walter had been gone for almost 4 years now. Sometimes I still caught myself turning to tell him things before remembering there was nobody standing beside me anymore. I slowly unpacked the groceries I'd bought that morning. Store-brand cranberry sauce, frozen dinner rolls, a small turkey breast because there was no point buying a whole bird for one person. The radio on the counter played soft Christmas music while snow drifted past the kitchen window in slow, heavy flakes. Outside, the neighborhood glowed with wreaths and white lights. Inside, my house felt painfully quiet. Around 7 that evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down in Walter's old recliner. That was when I saw Ethan's social media post. Christmas came early this year. The caption read beneath a photo of Nicole standing in front of a massive stone fireplace, wearing a cream-colored designer sweater. My grandchildren smiled beside her in matching pajamas, while Ethan held a glass of champagne in one hand. Behind them stood a towering Christmas tree covered in gold ribbon and crystal ornaments. The location tag read Aspen Ridge Luxury Villas. I stared at the screen for a long time before noticing the watch on Ethan's wrist. My chest tightened instantly. 2 years ago, Ethan had nearly lost everything after his business partner disappeared with company funds. I had emptied almost $60,000 from my retirement account to help him keep his house. That watch had been one of the items he sold during that time. But there it was again, shining proudly under the Christmas lights. Nicole had called me too poor for their holiday image. Yet somehow, they were celebrating with money that should have secured my future. And for the first time in months, something inside me stopped feeling sad and started paying attention. That night, I did not cry. I think that surprised me more than anything else. For years, I had always been the emotional one in the family. I cried at graduations, weddings, church plays, even those silly television commercials where soldiers came home to surprise their families. But sitting there alone beside my crooked little Christmas tree, watching snow pile against the front porch railing, I felt something colder than sadness settle inside me. Clarity. I turned off the television and walked slowly through the house, switching off lamps one by one. The only light left came from the tree in the living room and the small lamp above the stove. Walter used to leave that lamp on every night because he said a dark kitchen felt lonely. Even now, for years after his funeral, I still could not bring myself to turn it off before bed. I rinsed my tea mug carefully and placed it upside down on the drying towel. Then I opened the refrigerator and stared at the food I had prepared for Christmas Eve. The sweet potato casserole, the green beans with crispy onions, the pie cooling under plastic wrap. Enough food for a family that was never planning to come. My chest tightened when I realized something. Nicole had never intended to let me spend Christmas with them. The phone call had only come because she wanted to make sure I did not show up unexpectedly and ruin whatever image she was trying so desperately to create. I sat back down in Walter's recliner and picked up my phone again. More photos had appeared online. Nicole posing beside a giant staircase wrapped in garland. My grandchildren opening expensive gifts in matching silk pajamas. Ethan smiling with business associates near an outdoor fire pit while snow fell softly around them. Everything looked polished and perfect. But once you know someone is pretending, you start noticing the cracks. Ethan's smile looked strained. One of the photos showed a dining table overflowing with catered food and expensive wine bottles. Yet in the corner of the picture, I spotted a familiar envelope sitting half-hidden beneath Nicole's purse. My stomach dropped immediately. It was from Fairview Mortgage Group. I knew because I had received those same envelopes at my own house years earlier when Walter and I refinanced after his surgery. I zoomed in closer. Past due notice. Final reminder. I leaned back slowly, my fingers trembling slightly around the phone. That expensive villa. The designer clothes. The luxury Christmas. None of it was real. Suddenly, dozens of little moments from the past year started fitting together inside my mind like puzzle pieces. Ethan asking if I could help with school tuition 1 month because business was temporarily slow. Nicole casually mentioning that private schools were becoming unbelievably expensive. The time Ethan borrowed money to fix his truck, promising he would pay me back after a client contract cleared. He never did. I had convinced myself they were simply going through a rough patch. Families help each other. That was what Walter always believed. Before he died, he made me promise I would never let Ethan struggle alone. He has a good heart, Helen, Walter whispered from his hospital bed during those final days. He just trusts the wrong people sometimes. Back then, I thought he meant business partners. Now I was not so sure. Around 10:30 that night, my phone buzzed again. Nicole had posted another video. She stood beside the massive Christmas tree holding a glass of champagne while guests laughed behind her. Perfect family Christmas, the caption read. I almost scrolled past it. Then another voice suddenly interrupted the recording. Loud. Slurred slightly. Nicole, tell them who really paid for this place. The camera jerked sideways. Patricia Carter stumbled into frame, wearing a red velvet blouse and too much lipstick. Nicole's smile vanished instantly. Mom, stop, she hissed quietly. But Patricia only laughed louder. I am serious. If that old woman stops helping Ethan, you two will be living in a studio apartment by spring. The video ended abruptly 3 seconds later. I sat frozen in Walter's chair staring at the blank screen while my heartbeat thudded heavily inside my chest. Then my phone began vibrating over and over again with notifications. Comments. Messages. People had already started sharing the clip before Nicole could delete it. And for the first time in a very long while, I realized I was not invisible after all. The next morning, the world outside my window looked soft and peaceful under fresh snow, but my phone would not stop vibrating. I had 17 missed calls by 8 o'clock. Most were from Ethan. 2 were from Nicole. 1 came from Patricia Carter at nearly 3 in the morning, though she had not left a voicemail. I ignored all of them. Instead, I sat quietly at my kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal growing cold in front of me, while sunlight reflected off the icy branches outside. The house smelled faintly like cinnamon from the pie I baked the night before. Normally, Christmas morning had always been loud in this house. Wrapping paper on the floor. Walter pretending to assemble toys without instructions. Ethan running down the stairs in flannel pajamas when he was little. I used to think those memories would keep me warm forever. But memories can turn strange when you realize the people inside them no longer exist the way you believed they did. Around 9, my church friend Marilyn called. Her voice sounded cautious. Helen, honey, are you all right? I knew immediately she had seen the video. I am fine, I answered softly. There was a long pause. Then Marilyn sighed. People are talking. Nicole tried deleting it, but someone reposted the clip before she could. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course they did. The internet never lets people hide their worst moments for long. I am sorry, Marilyn said gently. Nobody deserves to be spoken about like that. I thanked her and changed the subject, asking about the church Christmas breakfast instead. I could hear the relief in her voice when the conversation moved away from gossip. Small towns pretend they dislike drama, but they survive on it. After we hung up, I carried my dishes to the sink and noticed movement outside. A delivery truck stopped in front of my house. The driver carried 2 large flower arrangements to my porch. White lilies and red roses. I stared at the attached card for several seconds before opening it. Mom, please answer your phone. Nicole's mother was drunk and saying nonsense. We love you. Ethan. I read the message twice. Not once did it say I am sorry. Not once did it acknowledge the humiliation, the lies, or the years I spent quietly saving them whenever their perfect life started cracking underneath the surface. I placed the flowers directly into the trash bin beside the garage. Then I went upstairs to my bedroom and opened Walter's old cedar chest at the foot of our bed. The hinges creaked softly as the lid lifted. Inside sat decades of carefully organized folders, documents, and envelopes. Walter believed paperwork should always be prepared before disaster arrives. People only panic when they do not know where things stand, he used to say. I ran my fingers slowly over the folders until I found the one labeled Family Trust. Suddenly, I remembered the conversation Walter and I had late one night during his final year alive. We had been sitting on the back porch listening to summer rain while Ethan struggled through another financial crisis. If something happens to me, Walter said quietly, promise me you will not hand over control too easily. At the time, I thought he was only worried about my grief clouding my judgment. I did not understand he had already noticed things about Ethan and Nicole that I refused to see. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. Mortgage records, property documents, investment accounts. Then I found the page that made my breath catch in my throat. Ethan's home was never fully transferred into his name. Walter had placed the property under the family trust after helping Ethan avoid foreclosure 3 years earlier. Control remained with the surviving trustee, me. I sat motionless on the edge of my bed staring at the document while snow continued falling outside the window. Nicole spent years acting as though I was some fragile old woman they tolerated out of obligation. But the entire foundation beneath their luxury life still rested quietly in my hands. My phone started ringing again downstairs. This time, I let it ring until the sound finally stopped. By early afternoon, the snow had stopped falling, and the neighborhood looked almost postcard perfect. Children dragged sleds down the sidewalks while distant Christmas music floated through the cold air from somebody's front porch speakers. Inside my house, the silence felt steady now instead of lonely. I made myself another cup of tea and carried the trust documents downstairs to the dining room table. The same table where Walter and I hosted Thanksgiving dinners for nearly 40 years. Though it still held faint scratches from Ethan's toy trucks when he was little. I ran my fingers over one of those tiny marks and suddenly remembered a winter long ago when Ethan was 8 years old and terrified his homemade Christmas ornament would not be good enough for the school fundraiser. He cried at the kitchen table because another boy laughed at the glitter falling off his construction paper star. Walter sat beside him for over an hour helping him glue every tiny piece back into place. Nothing built with love is cheap, he told him. I closed my eyes briefly at the memory. Somewhere along the way, my son forgot that lesson. Around 1:30, my front doorbell rang. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Ethan stood on the porch wearing an expensive wool coat dusted with melting snowflakes. His face looked pale and exhausted, dark circles under his eyes like he had not slept all night. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be beneath all the stress and shame. "Mom," he said quietly. I stepped aside without answering. Ethan entered slowly, glancing around the house as though he had not truly looked at it in years. His eyes paused briefly on the old Christmas decorations, the faded stockings, the tiny ceramic church village Walter loved setting up every December. "The house smells the same," he murmured. I almost laughed at that. Of course it smelled the same. Some of us never stopped trying to keep a home together. Ethan sat down heavily at the dining room table while I poured coffee into 2 mugs. Neither of us touched it right away. Finally, he rubbed both hands across his face and sighed. "Mom, Nicole is freaking out. Her social media accounts are exploding. People are reposting that live stream everywhere." I stirred cream into my coffee slowly. "I see." Ethan looked at me carefully, almost nervously. "Patricia was drunk. You know how she gets." "Apparently honest," I replied softly. The silence after that stretched painfully across the room. Ethan stared down at the untouched coffee cup in front of him. "Nicole did not mean what she said," he whispered finally. "About me embarrassing your Christmas?" I asked calmly. Ethan flinched. "She just gets caught up in appearances sometimes." Appearances. Such a harmless-sounding word for something that destroys people little by little. I leaned back in my chair and studied my son quietly. His coat alone probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Yet underneath all of it, I could see fear beginning to settle into him. Not guilt. Not yet. Fear. "How bad are things financially, Ethan?" His head snapped upward immediately. "Too fast." "We are fine." I said nothing. After a few seconds, his shoulders sagged slightly. "Things got tighter this year," he admitted. "The market changed. Some contracts fell through. And the villa? Another silence. Ethan stared out the dining room window at the snow-covered yard. Nicole thought hosting something luxurious would help attract higher-end clients. I almost smiled at the irony of it. They spent money pretending to be wealthy in order to convince other wealthy people to trust them with money they did not actually have. Do you remember the second mortgage your father and I took out after his surgery? I asked quietly. Ethan blinked in confusion at the sudden question. Of course. Do you remember why? Because the insurance refused part of the treatment coverage. I nodded slowly. Your father sold his truck during that time. We stopped eating at restaurants. I worked weekends at the bookstore for nearly a year. Ethan lowered his eyes. I know. We struggled privately because we believed dignity mattered more than appearances. My voice remained soft, but each word landed heavier now. Somewhere along the way, you started believing the opposite. Ethan swallowed hard. Then his eyes drifted toward the open folder sitting near my elbow on the table. I watched the exact moment recognition crossed his face. His expression changed instantly. Mom, he said carefully, why do you have the trust documents out? I folded my hands together and looked directly at him for the first time since he arrived. Because last night reminded me that there are certain things in this family you and Nicole never fully understood. The color drained from Ethan's face as he stared at the folder on the dining room table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Somewhere outside, I could hear children laughing as they pulled sleds down the snowy hill near the park entrance. The sound felt strangely distant, like it belonged to another life entirely. Ethan finally cleared his throat. Mom, what exactly are you saying? I folded the trust papers carefully before answering. I am saying your father planned ahead more carefully than either of you realized. Ethan leaned forward slowly, tension tightening across his shoulders. The house, his voice trailed off. I nodded once. Still belongs to the family trust. He stared at me as if I had suddenly become someone unfamiliar. That cannot be right. I slid the documents across the table toward him. His hands shook slightly as he flipped through the pages. I watched his eyes move faster and faster down the legal language until he finally reached the signature page bearing Walter's name. The silence afterward felt heavy enough to press against the walls. Why did Dad do this? Ethan whispered. I looked toward the living room where the Christmas tree lights still glowed softly in the dim afternoon light. Because your father understood the difference between helping someone and rescuing them forever. Ethan rubbed his forehead with one hand. Nicole thought. He stopped himself too late. Nicole thought what? I asked quietly. He swallowed hard. That after you got older, eventually everything would naturally transfer over anyway. There it was. Not grief. Not family. Not love. Expectation. I felt surprisingly calm hearing it spoken aloud. Like finally seeing the shape of something that had been lurking in shadows for years. Ethan pushed the papers away and stood up abruptly, pacing toward the kitchen window. Mom, things just spiraled faster than we expected. The business looked successful from the outside, but we kept falling behind. Every time we tried catching up, another bill hit. I remained seated. And instead of downsizing, you rented luxury villas and hosted parties for strangers. Ethan turned sharply. You do not understand how important appearances are in my industry. I almost smiled at the sadness of that sentence. Then perhaps your industry is built on very fragile things. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Deep down, I think he already knew I was right. Ethan had never truly been selfish as a child. Weak, yes. Easily influenced, certainly. But not cruel. That part belonged to Nicole. She treated life like a performance where every person either improved the image or threatened it. And somewhere along the way, my son became so desperate to keep up with her version of success that he stopped noticing the damage underneath it all. My phone buzzed softly on the table. Another message from Nicole. I did not open it. Ethan noticed anyway. She is panicking, he admitted. Quietly. Sponsors are dropping partnerships already. People are calling her fake. Fake. Such a small word for something so exhausting to maintain year after year. Did she ever plan on telling me the truth? I asked. Ethan looked away immediately. That answer hurt more than I expected. I stood slowly and carried both coffee mugs into the kitchen. The sink water ran hot over my hands while I rinsed the cups carefully. I could feel Ethan watching me from behind, waiting for anger or tears or some emotional explosion he could respond to. But I felt none of those things anymore. Just exhaustion. Your father worked 70-hour weeks at the machine shop, I said quietly while drying the mugs. Do you remember that? Of course. He missed vacations, delayed retirement, sold things he loved. Also, you would never lose stability. I turned around slowly. And somehow you turned that sacrifice into a stage set for social media photos. Ethan lowered his eyes like a scolded child. For the first time since arriving, he looked ashamed instead of defensive. I never wanted things to get this bad, he whispered. I believed him. That was the tragedy of it. Most disasters do not begin with evil intentions. They begin with small compromises repeated, so often people stop recognizing themselves. My phone buzzed again. This time it was not Nicole. It was Patricia Carter. I stared at her name on the screen, while Ethan's expression tightened instantly with anxiety. The message preview appeared beneath it. Helen, there is something you deserve to know before Nicole gets to you first. I looked up slowly at my son. Then I opened the message. Patricia's message contained only one sentence and a photo attachment. Be careful what Nicole blames on Ethan. My stomach tightened before I even opened the image. Ethan stood frozen near the kitchen doorway, watching my face carefully as I tapped the screen. The photo loaded slowly. It showed a stack of printed bank statements spread across what looked like Patricia's marble kitchen island. At first glance, the numbers blurred together meaninglessly. Then my eyes landed on one account name. Helen Brooks Educational Fund. My breath caught so sharply that Ethan immediately stepped closer. What is it? He asked. I did not answer right away. I zoomed in slowly on the transfer records. Monthly withdrawals. Thousands of dollars at a time. Luxury retailers. Resort payments. Designer boutiques. My hands turned cold against the phone. The educational account had been created by Walter before he died for our grandchildren's future college tuition. He contributed to it quietly for years, even during periods when money was tight. No matter what happens, he used to say, those kids deserve options. Ethan's face lost all color as I handed him the phone. I watched his eyes move across the transactions. Then he whispered one word. No, the sound barely escaped him. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, staring at the screen like he no longer recognized the world in front of him. I did not know about this, he said quietly. For the first time since this nightmare began, I believed him completely. Ethan knew they were struggling financially. He knew Nicole obsessed over appearances and spent too much money trying to maintain them. But this crossed into something else entirely. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes for a moment. Suddenly memories began resurfacing with painful clarity. Nicole insisting the children needed private tutoring programs that cost thousands every semester. Nicole complaining that the old SUV looked embarrassing in school pickup lines. Nicole saying social status mattered because successful people noticed details. Every luxury had been wrapped in the language of necessity until nobody questioned it anymore. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face slowly. Mom, I swear to you, I never touched the kids' education account. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Nicole handled most of our finances this year because I was trying to keep the business afloat. I nodded faintly, though my chest still felt unbearably heavy. The betrayal was not just financial. It was moral. Walter worked himself into exhaustion, making sure those grandchildren would one day have opportunities neither of us had growing up. And Nicole treated that sacrifice like a shopping allowance. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Patricia appeared beneath the first. She moved money months ago. I told her to stop before this got ugly. Ethan stared blankly at the table while I read it. Does Nicole know her mother sent this? I asked quietly. Ethan laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. Probably not. They have been fighting nonstop since last night. Outside, the late afternoon sky had begun fading into pale gray. Christmas lights flickered on across the neighborhood one house at a time. Through the window, I watched a young couple helping their little boy build a snowman across the street. Their laughter drifted faintly through the glass. Normal life continuing while mine quietly cracked open at the center. Ethan suddenly looked up at me with an expression I had not seen since he was a teenager. Fear mixed with shame. Mom, if the trust controls the house, he stopped speaking. He did not need to finish the sentence. If I withdrew financial protection now, everything would collapse quickly. The mortgage, the schools, the business image they spent years constructing. I walked slowly back into the dining room and sat beside the glowing Christmas tree. The ornaments reflected softly in the dark window behind it. Some were chipped now. Others faded with age. But every single one carried a real memory. None of them needed to pretend to be more valuable than they were. Ethan followed quietly and stood near the doorway. "Are you going to take the house?" he asked in a strained voice. I looked up at him for a long moment before answering. "Your father spent his whole life building stability for this family," I said softly. "The question is whether any of you still deserve what he protected." Ethan lowered his eyes again. For the first time in years, he looked less like a businessman and more like a lost little boy standing in the ruins of choices he should have stopped much sooner. And somehow, that hurt me more than Nicole's cruelty ever did. That evening, after Ethan finally left, I sat alone in the living room with only the Christmas tree lights glowing softly against the dark walls. The house felt different now. Not emptier, clearer. For years I had confused silence with peace. I thought if I stayed patient enough, generous enough, understanding enough, eventually everyone around me would remember what mattered. But silence does not heal selfishness. Sometimes it only gives it room to grow. Snow had started falling again outside the windows in slow drifting sheets. I pulled Walter's old knitted blanket over my lap and stared at the ornaments hanging on the tree. One by one, memories surfaced quietly. Ethan at 10 years old begging for the red bicycle we could not afford that Christmas. Walter working overtime for 3 straight weeks so we could surprise him with it anyway. Ethan crying after his first business failure at 27, while Nicole sat silently beside him pretending everything was under control. The night Ethan nearly lost the house and Walter stayed awake until 3 in the morning reviewing loan paperwork at this very dining room table. We did not build this family with luxury. We built it with sacrifice. That was the part Nicole never understood because she only valued things once they looked expensive enough to post online. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Nicole's breathing came fast through the speaker before she even spoke. "Helen, thank God. I have been trying to reach you all day." Her voice sounded shaky, but underneath it I could still hear that familiar sharpness she used whenever she lost control of a situation. "I imagine today has been difficult for you," I said calmly. "Difficult?" she snapped suddenly. "People are destroying me online. Sponsors are canceling contracts. Somebody leaked the live stream to gossip pages." I closed my eyes briefly. Not once did she ask how I was feeling. Not once did she mention the things she said about me. Her panic only existed because the audience had turned against her. "Nicole," I asked softly, "did you take money from the children's education account?" Silence exploded across the line. For several long seconds, I heard nothing except her breathing. Then she answered too quickly. "It was temporary." Temporary. Such a dangerous word. People ruin entire lives using temporary justifications. The investments were supposed to pay everything back before anyone noticed. She continued rapidly. Ethan's business needed stronger clients. We had to maintain a certain image or everything would collapse. I stared at the snow outside while she spoke. The strange thing was that Nicole genuinely believed her own logic. In her mind, appearances were survival. Luxury was not vanity. It was armor. "You used the children's future to rent villas and buy designer handbags," I said quietly. "You called me poor while spending money that did not belong to you." Nicole's voice hardened immediately. "You have no idea what pressure we are under." I almost laughed at that. Walter survived layoffs, surgeries, and second mortgages without ever stealing from his grandchildren. Pressure reveals character. It does not excuse destroying it. Did Ethan know? I asked. Another pause. Smaller this time. "Not everything," she admitted finally. I leaned back slowly in Walter's recliner and looked toward his framed photograph beside the fireplace. He always hated dishonesty more than failure. "There is something else," Nicole said suddenly, her voice turning nervous again. "Ethan told me you found out about the trust." "Yes." "Helen, if you pull support now, we lose the house." There was at last. The real fear beneath everything else. Not family. Not shame. Survival. I let the silence stretch long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I asked quietly, "Do you remember what you told me 3 days ago?" Nicole did not answer. "You said I did not fit your Christmas image because I still use coupons." Her breathing caught faintly. I was angry. "No," I said softly. "You were honest." The room stayed completely silent after that except for the faint hum of Christmas lights near the window. Finally, Nicole's voice cracked for the first time since the call began. "What are you going to do?" I looked at Walter's photograph again. then at the trust papers folded neatly beside my chair. For years I believed protecting my family meant shielding them from consequences. But maybe real protection meant finally forcing them to face the truth about who they had become. I have an appointment with our attorney Monday morning, I answered calmly. And before Nicole could say another word, I ended the call. Monday morning arrived gray and bitterly cold. Thin ice covered the edges of the sidewalks as I drove downtown toward the attorney's office Walter and I had used for nearly 20 years. The heater hummed softly inside my old sedan while Christmas music played low through the speakers, though now the songs sounded strangely hollow. Every storefront along Main Street still glittered with wreaths and decorations, but the holiday cheer felt distant from the reality quietly unfolding inside my family. I parked beside the brick building and sat in the car for a moment watching people hurry past carrying shopping bags and paper coffee cups. Nobody looking at me would have guessed I was about to decide whether my own son lost his home. That thought settled heavily inside my chest. Martin Keller greeted me warmly when I entered his office. He had aged since Walter's funeral, more silver around the temples now, but his calm, steady presence remained the same. "Helen," he said gently, shaking my hand. "I was sorry to hear things became complicated over the holidays. Small towns. News traveled fast." I sat across from him while snow drifted softly outside his office window. For nearly an hour, we reviewed every document inside the trust. Mortgage obligations, asset protections, educational accounts. Walter had structured everything carefully after Ethan's financial collapse years earlier. "Your husband anticipated continued instability," Martin explained quietly while adjusting his glasses. He wanted safeguards in place in case emotional pressure ever clouded financial judgment. Emotional pressure. Such polite legal words for guilt. I spent years feeling guilty anytime Ethan struggled. Guilty anytime I said no. Guilty anytime I considered protecting myself instead of rescuing him. Martin slid another folder toward me. "There is one thing you should understand clearly before making any decisions." I opened the file slowly. Inside sat records showing every trust payment made toward Ethan's mortgage over the past 3 years. The total made my stomach tighten. Walter and I had effectively funded almost half their lifestyle, while Nicole publicly mocked me for clipping coupons and shopping sales. "If support stops immediately," Martin continued carefully, "they will likely default within 6 months." I stared at the paperwork in silence. 6 months. That was all standing between their luxury image and complete collapse. "Can I ask something honestly?" Martin said softly after a moment. I nodded faintly. "Do you want to punish them or protect what remains of the family?" The question lingered heavily between us. Outside the office window, snowflakes drifted lazily past the glass. I thought about Ethan as a little boy building snow forts with Walter in our backyard. I thought about my grandchildren hanging stockings in the living room each December. Then I remembered Nicole's voice saying I did not fit their Christmas image because I looked too poor. The truth was, this was never really about money. It was about dignity. About becoming invisible inside your own family, while still being expected to quietly fund everyone else's comfort. "I do not want revenge," I answered finally. "But I think they need to experience consequences before they destroy themselves completely." Martin nodded slowly like a man who had expected that answer all along. We spent the next hour restructuring the trust. Educational accounts were immediately frozen against further withdrawals. Mortgage support would continue temporarily, but only under strict financial oversight. Every discretionary luxury expense would stop. No more hidden bailouts. No more silent rescues. When I finally stepped back outside, the cold air hit my face sharply. My phone buzzed almost instantly. "Ethan," I answered after the third ring. "Mom." His voice sounded exhausted again. "Nicole just got served notification about the frozen accounts." I leaned against my car door and looked across the snowy parking lot. "Yes." Silence crackled softly through the phone. Then Ethan asked the question he had probably dreaded all morning. "Are we losing the house?" I closed my eyes briefly. "Not today." His breath released shakily on the other end. Relief flooded his voice so quickly it almost broke my heart. "Thank you," he whispered. But before that relief could settle too deeply, I spoke again. "Things are changing now, Ethan." Silence returned immediately. "Your father built that trust to protect this family, not finance appearances. If you and Nicole want stability, you're going to have to start living honestly." I heard movement in the background, Then Nicole's muffled voice demanding to know what I said. Ethan did not answer her right away. For the first time in years, he sounded tired of defending things he no longer fully believed in himself. I understand, he said quietly. I looked up toward the pale winter sky, while snow continued falling softly around the town Walter and I built our life in. Sometimes love is not giving people everything they want. Sometimes love is finally refusing to help them lie to themselves any longer. Nearly a year passed before things finally began to feel quiet again. Not perfect, not repaired completely, but honest. The following December arrived colder than usual, with thick snow piled along the sidewalks and icicles hanging from the church rooftops downtown. I stood in my kitchen early one Saturday morning rolling pie dough, while cinnamon and butter filled the house with warmth. Christmas music played softly through the radio again, but this time it no longer sounded hollow. The strange ache that once followed me through every room had softened into something gentler. Acceptance, perhaps. The past year changed all of us. Ethan sold the luxury SUV 3 months after the trust restrictions began. Nicole deleted most of her social media accounts after sponsorships disappeared and friends slowly stopped calling. The private school transferred the children to a smaller academy across town. They even sold designer furniture from the house to stabilize bills during the summer. For the first time since marrying Nicole, Ethan started handling his own finances directly instead of hiding behind appearances and excuses. It was not easy for him. Pride rarely collapses quietly. But little by little, something steadier began emerging underneath all the panic. Responsibility. Nicole changed too, though more slowly. Some people only understand humility after life strips away every costume they spent years hiding behind. We still were not close. Some wounds heal into scars instead of disappearing entirely. But she stopped speaking to me with that cold superiority in her voice. She stopped treating kindness like weakness. Sometimes that is the most growth you can expect from another person. Around noon, the front doorbell rang. I wiped flour from my hands and opened the door to find Ethan standing there holding 2 grocery bags while snowflakes dusted the shoulders of his coat. Behind him, my grandchildren bounced excitedly on the porch steps bundled in scarves and mittens. "Grandma," little Avery shouted before throwing herself into my arms. I held her tightly and breathed in the scent of winter air and peppermint shampoo. Ethan smiled faintly as he stepped inside. "We brought extra potatoes and cider," he said. His voice sounded calmer these days. Less rushed, less performative, real. The children immediately ran toward the living room where the old Christmas tree still leaned slightly to one side beneath its familiar ornaments. Last year, I thought that crooked tree represented loneliness. Now it simply looked lived in, loved. Ethan carried the groceries into the kitchen while I returned to rolling pie dough. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence between us no longer felt hostile, just careful. Then he cleared his throat softly. "Mom, I never really thanked you." I kept my eyes on the dough beneath my hands. "For what?" "For not destroying us when you had every reason to." I stopped rolling for a moment and looked out the kitchen window where snow drifted softly across the backyard Walter once spent entire weekends maintaining. "I did not want destruction," I answered quietly. "I wanted truth." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know that now." His eyes drifted toward the old family photo hanging near the refrigerator. Walter smiling proudly with one arm around me, while a teenage Ethan stood between us holding a fishing pole almost taller than he was. "Dad would probably be disappointed in me," he admitted. I smiled sadly at that. Your father believed people could recover from mistakes if they were willing to face them honestly. Ethan looked down at the counter for several seconds before speaking again. "Nicole has been volunteering at the church food pantry lately." That surprised me enough to laugh softly under my breath. "Really? Every Tuesday morning?" He smiled faintly. "Turns out serving free soup to people changes your perspective on what poor actually means." I thought back to Nicole mocking my coupons and discount grocery shopping 1 year earlier. Funny how quickly life humbles people once appearances stop protecting them from reality. A burst of laughter suddenly erupted from the living room as the children argued over where to hang handmade ornaments on the crooked tree. Ethan looked toward the sound and smiled fully this time. Not the polished smile he used for clients or photographs. Just a tired father grateful for a peaceful afternoon. I realized then that this Christmas felt richer than any luxury villa ever could. No expensive champagne. No rented image. No desperate performance, pretending to be more successful than we truly were. Just warmth. Just honesty. Just family trying, imperfectly, to become worthy of each other again. And as snow continued falling softly outside the windows of the little house Walter and I built together all those years ago, I finally understood something simple but important. Real love does not ask you to disappear in order to belong.